So next up is most disappointing, which is kind of what it sounds like. Basically, it was a game
Yeah.
that it's different, right? It's one of two things. It's either game with most anticipation and least payoff, or it is just generally a thing that you could see something in. They just didn't get there in a way that's
Yeah.
just
Mm-hmm.
you're not it just didn't pan out. So in
Yep.
this list we have Kentucky Route Zero, Doom Eternal, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Deadly Premonition 2, Half-Life Alyx, Destiny 2, Control, but specifically the AWE expansion, Watch Dogs Legion, Cyberpunk 2077, Last of Us 2, Watch Dogs Legion's in
Oh,
here
what's the things
twice,
on there twice?
and
Oops.
and just quoting directly from the list here, the last like 6 hours of Final Fantasy VII Remake.
It's very specific, but for a
Okay.
very specific reason.
Okay, cool.
Uh,
So I'll start with this. Kentucky Route Zero is not going to stay on this list. It's disappointing because this and one other game, which I will get to. Oh, did I write it on here? Maybe I didn't write it on here. Okay, but like basically this and Umurangi Generation for me this year
Yeah.
were games that a lot of the people in the industry that I really respect their opinion of thought these games were incredible, and I just didn't get anything out of them. And even after listening to them explain why it's good, it's like it just didn't resonate in the same way for me. And there's multiple reasons for that. That there's a whole other podcast about why. But I talked a little bit about KRZ when I finished it earlier in the year in the podcast. But like that game is also almost uniquely I mean, the core of it is about like debt, basically. Like if you had to write one word about what that game's about debt and its impact on people. But like also it embeds so much American mysticism about like it relies on that aura that
the thing
really
that I was going to say was that was the thing I was going to say about Kentucky Route Zero was that as midpoint of this year, one of my favorite game essayists put out an essay about Kentucky Route Zero, and his conclusions kind of made a lot of sense, where that game is rooted a lot in American culture about work and business, and which is potentially why it doesn't hit as hard for us. And a lot of it, and that makes total sense, because a lot of the people that we follow that are very well respected in the industry are American, so of course it would work well for them. But yeah, I can understand why it would be a crestfallen moment to be like, I don't understand why people are saying like this, but maybe it's just like a cultural thing.
It's really interesting to see, because I watched that essay as well, and I agree with a lot of the points there. I mean, there are a lot of stuff that carries over, like capitalism taking the life out of people is quite literal.
There are universal constants,
but like very specific parts of it come out in like there's a lot of kind of American mythos in there, and again stuff in there that like you understand conceptually, like the part of that game that comments on the American healthcare system, right, where it's just like one of the main characters loses their leg, gets replaced with a quote unquote better leg or replacement leg that's theoretically better, but then is entirely in debt for the rest of their life and dies because of it, right? And you're like, well, like I conceptually get that, and I understand that is the condition for a lot of people in the States, but it's obviously not going to hit as hard because I don't know anyone who that's happened to, and it's not a thing for now in this country that is a thing that could potentially happen to us, right? Like it requires, in order for it to hit as hard as it does, it needs to have that context of lived experience that I don't think we have.
I think that's fair.
So it's not, the game itself is not disappointing. It's just it hits harder for specific people, which is not a bad thing, which is awesome. It's just it doesn't work for me. So disappointing is probably wrong. I just wanted to say my piece on that.
No, I think that's fair.
And again, I would have put Umurangi in here as well, but Umurangi I have different issues with.
Yeah, that's like it's not on the list, so we don't need to talk about it.
Yeah, it's fine. Doom Eternal is just disappointing. I think it's.
I 100% can't come with you on this, but
really,
you can go for it. Yeah, I thought Doom Eternal was fucking great.
Oh, okay, right, okay. I didn't realize we were differences here. Doom Eternal for me, it feels like they took. Weirdly enough, it feels like Doom Eternal is like the. It feels like a repeat of. What am I trying to say? Remember when D4 was coming out, and we were like, I wonder if Square knows why we like Square games. And it turns out D4 came out. It was like, oh no, he knows entirely. Okay, sure.
Yeah, he knows why we like Square games. Yeah.
I don't think Doom understood. I don't think id understood why people liked the original Doom, because it doubles down on a bunch of stuff that I don't think is the best part of that game and why it was as good as it is. Because like the original Doom was, or when I say original, the 2016 Doom was kind of almost a puzzle game with guns. It was like, here's an area, here's a specific encounter, solve it, while also like keeping you on the edge and having to manipulate all your different weapons and all this kind of stuff. For Eternal, it feels like they just tripled everything and was like, well, you liked one of it, so how about 3 times the same thing? And it's like, there are too many mechanics that you have to deal with or not deal with, as you did with me, where I was like, I basically never used one of the powers, because it was just like, I can't manage it in all these situations. The end of that game, like the last 2 hours of that game, 3 hours of that game are just like, it's just more stuff that doesn't need to be there. And when like the kind of encapsulation of what I think a lot of this is the first time they add the Marauders. The first time you fight a Marauder, and you're like, here is a super intelligent, like very quick, dangerous enemy that you have to figure out and deal with. And that fight was really, really cool. And then 30 minutes later, they give you 2 of them in the same arena. And it's just like, this is just, no, because the whole point was that was a one-on-one fight that you have to work out. And now you're just like, well, 1 was difficult, how about 2? And it's just like, no, stop. Like, you need to do different, not more. And I just didn't, like, I still haven't finished that game, and I've got 0 push to go back to it. I'm just like, it's just too much. It's just too much of the wrong thing. And also they tried to like continue the dumb story. And you're like, no, the story was, it wasn't the fact the story was dumb. It was the fact that the story was super serious and the Doomslayer didn't give a fuck was the funny part of that.
Yeah, I'll give you the story stuff.
Here's lore.
I can't come with you on the mechanics thing. Like I think that the stuff that they added, I didn't find overwhelming at all.
Really?
And it ties so well into the combat loop of that game, where I agree with you that the first game was like a puzzle. I still think Eternal is like a puzzle, but the combat becomes more, how would you put it? More like dance-like, where it is like, it's about movement and flowing around an arena and doing things at specific points to get specific reactions out of things.
Yeah.
It's not, like, I didn't find, like, the grenade stuff I thought was a really cool addition as a way to get armor, and freeze, the freeze one as well was like a specific thing. I thought the sword edition was cool as just like a be all and end all if you need it. Like, I don't think that I never found it overwhelming. The Marauders are a different thing, where I agree with you about that fight on its own was really cool, and then they went, here's 2. I was like, that's maybe a bit too much too soon, but it's, I can't come with you on the mechanics. Like, the story stuff I can agree with, where it's like they threw a bunch of words at it and were like, here's the story, and you're like, that's not why I cared about Doom. Like
I don't care about Doomslayer as a character, so stop giving me backstory about, like, stop showing me his mates. And you're just like, I don't like, no.
I don't need like extra words and stuff about what the Doomslayer is. I need a sci-fi story that takes itself super seriously into Doomslayer to go,
and, like,
okay, I'll reload my shotgun. Like that's all
like,
I need.
The moment you've added to best moment is like the one saving grace of that thing where you're just like, this is so
that's
the
one moment that I've added in best moment is the moment where I'm like, that's the sort of Doom that I wanted.
Yes,
but yeah,
I want more of that.
Yeah,
I think.
But yeah, I can't come with you on the mechanics thing. I'm sorry, but
I think the moment for me was when, because I'd played most of that game on medium difficulty, and I got to the point where I was just like, I'm just dying, like I'm barely surviving anything at this minute. I'm just going to bump it down to easy to at least have the power trip that you would want from a bit of Doom, and it didn't get any better for me. Like I got further through it, but I was just like, okay, fine. Animal Crossing, I put this on, but I'm kind of delaying this to
eggs,
you.
Man. Like this.
Okay.
Oh, they made so many bad decisions. Like they've fixed it since. Like their recent, well, not really, because the Christmas one was fucked as well. But they on-ramped Animal Crossing, which was initially I thought was a good idea, but the more I thought about it, I was like, that's kind of not what Animal Crossing's for. Where they spent ages in Animal Crossing New Horizon being like, we're going to introduce you to, here's how to build a house, here's how you pick stuff up, here's where you can go to sell it, and slowly trickling this stuff out over the course of like days, because they would get to the point where in Animal Crossing people would just stop talking to you and giving you stuff, and you had to come back the next day to do stuff, to the point where time skipping became the norm to get through all the fucking tutorial bullshit to then let you actually design your island and do all the stuff you want to do in Animal Crossing.
To let you actually play the game. Yeah. For me, it was...
Which was disappointing enough. Yeah, sorry. You can go
but then for me, like, it was... Because I'd never been in a position to play really any Animal Crossing. Like, I just never had one. And my wife was interested enough. Was like, okay, we're going to get Animal Crossing. We'll both be able to play... We'll both be able to like have our own islands and go visit our own islands. And
the multiplayer
and all this
shit. Yeah.
All of this for me is, or like most of this for me is like their implementation of multiplayer is just, it's the most abysmal thing for reasons that don't make sense anymore. Like they've basically exhausted their "we're trying to protect the kids" argument, because now it's just because now they've rolled it out, right? They've actually pulled it closer to home, where like for the multiplayer thing, like, I understand if you want to add roadblocks in this situation where you don't want people to encounter randos who can completely destroy your game. Like, I get that bit. That's fine. Yeah. But the idea that I'm sitting on a single Switch with two users in the same house that theoretically anyone in your house with a controller you have a semblance of trust with, and it's so abysmally hard to play that game together, just makes no sense to me. Like, absolutely
it's
no sense. And just compounding on top of the multiplayer stuff. Yeah.
That is awful. Like, it's such a terrible design. Especially when they were like, oh yeah, we're trying to protect the kids or whatever. But one of the main reasons they put out was like, we don't want people who time skip to come in and ruin your island. Yeah. And we're like, people are fucking doing that anyway. Yeah, like, it doesn't matter that you're saying we don't want to do this because people time skip. People are going to time skip. Just fucking accept it. Like, totally. It doesn't matter.
Like, there's absolutely zero way for you to protect against that, especially in a world where
nothing you can do.
Because the entire protection from that stuff was like narrative, right? Oh no, sorry, that was save games. Who was it? Was it Rossetti that would get you for like save game manipulation? That would come up and say you've been naughty, and it's like this is going to happen. Like, anyone involved in the development of that game is going to be like, there's zero way to protect ourselves from this, like, at all. It's just not going to happen. So let's assume it's going to happen for the people who it's going to happen for, and just focus on everything else and make everything else easier, as opposed to like, we have to invent an entirely different cloud save system because
oh god, that as well.
And then all of that stuff, and you're just like, and and also the main player concept that they don't even explain. Like, something at the start of that game that says, they didn't talk about it in the run up to, like, it started to leak out through like interviews, and you're like, you're gonna have one shared island. You're gonna have one shared island, but the idea of like, there's a main player and then there's your second class citizens, which is everyone else.
Yeah.
And I did the thing where, like, obviously I wasn't gonna play it as much as my wife did, but like, the idea that she can do like 3 or 4 hours at the start of that game. I was like, cool, I'll jump in now and create my character and do all this stuff. And you're like, well, a bunch of the starts happened, and you can't really contribute to anything on this island because you're not the main player. So I don't know, go hit some trees. And you're like, what's the point in me playing? Like, there's 0 point in me playing this game.
0 point in you being there, yeah.
It's wild. Like, they just do not understand how people have played their own game. And
and you compound that on top of the multiplayer stuff. There was then, it got to Easter, which was their first like seasonal event, which was like big deal in Animal Crossing when seasons come around. It's like new items and everybody gets dressed up and it's super cool. And that thing was literally just fucking do an egg hunt.
It was
go around and dig stuff. Going around and dig stuff up, get all the recipes, make all the things, and then at the end of it you'll get a bunny suit. But it also like it got in the way of actually playing normal Animal Crossing because you had to like you would go about trying to dig up like fossils or whatever like that, and it was just more fucking eggs.
Yep.
Or you would try and fish to get super rare fish, and it would just be more fucking eggs. Yep. Or you would knock stuff out of the clouds that was a box, and like the presents out the sky, and you'd open it up, and it'd be a recipe that you already have you can exchange for more fucking eggs, and it was so bad, and it was just this collectathon that didn't actually mean anything.
So the best example of that, my sister-in-law got Animal Crossing at Easter, so started that game
would be a bad time.
With the eggs, and she's just like, I can't make any progress because I keep getting fucking eggs rather than the thing I actually need to progress the island. It just again, for the second time so far, it feels like they just don't understand why people like their game, and it's so depressing. It really is, because there's bad. But
Deadly Premonition 2, man, that's sad. What a game.
There's a Deadly Premonition game that I've put 4 hours or something into and have never touched.
Yeah. There's a sequel to Deadly Premonition that I don't want to play because it's actively difficult to play.
Yeah.
And
like, this is purely a lot of the narrative stuff that people have had issues with, I haven't really even hit, because that game is so technically a mess that it stops you from playing. Like
sub double digit frame rates.
Yeah, like single digit frame rates in the open world. In an open world game.
Yeah. In an open world game, like massive breaks of like the controls don't work, and
UI just stop.
The game is fundamentally broken.
Yeah.
And that's ridiculous. Even you could ignore the whole like misrepresentation of trans people and stuff like that, which obviously we're not going to, because that's awful as well.
Yeah.
But
like, I never even
if you ignore all that stuff and just say it is a fundamentally broken game.
Yes.
For something that it's almost, it's the same sort of thing that we said before, where it's like, I'm not sure that Swery understands why people liked Deadly Premonition, which was, it was a game that it was a bad game that worked, but was charming because of the writing and the characters and the situations and stuff like that. This game has flipped it to be like, hey, it's all these wacky characters, that's what you wanted, right? And you're like, yeah, but we also want to be able to like do things to help us interact with the characters.
Totally. Like I think that there's, if that game was fully technically functional, there's probably something there. But like,
probably, yeah, like I probably would have played more of it, but
there's probably not a game this year that the technical aspects of the game have stopped from enjoying what's actually there. More than Deadly Premonition. Like,
yeah,
I think that's it really for me.
Yeah, and then obviously there's the misrepresentation of trans people.
Oh yeah, and all the narrative stuff in there, which like it didn't respond great to. But I can't comment on that because I didn't see it. Is the problem?
Yeah, I didn't see
like,
either, which
at
is
all.
the problem.
Sorry, I've just knocked my mic. Half-Life Alyx. Not is it disappointing? It's disappointing because I couldn't finish it, basically, because you needed...
Because of Jeff.
Yes. But also, like, they needed to... What am I trying to say? They needed to be more explicit about what that game is up front. Where that is a horror game, right? It is a 100% a VR horror game, right? And I said this back when I first got VR and I first started experiencing VR with that initial batch of games, is like, content warnings are so much more of a thing that need to be done in VR because it affects people in such a different way than traditional video games do.
Yeah, absolutely.
That like the idea that also this game was 60 quid. I think I'm pretty sure it was 60 quid from the start. But like, it is a phenomenally well produced. It shows what VR can do if you put time, effort, and design into it, and like the budget of somebody like a Valve. But like, not only is it VR, which automatically restricts the people who can play it, but like the idea that it is a horror game that pulls no punches. It's just it meant that you couldn't go near it. Really, there are a lot of people that would not be able to go near that game. But like, it's not disappointing. Like, it is what it is. The disappointing thing is they didn't say up front this is a horror game. At which point I could have gone and wiped my hands and go no thank you. But like the first hour of that game, I want everyone to play. Basically.
Oh yeah, I'm super excited for when we're allowed to be in the same room and I can play that thing.
I want you to do the first hour of that game because it's spectacular. Yeah. Destiny 2 is purely for me. I know it's not going to make the list. This is the year that Destiny burned me too hard and I had to put it away and uninstalled it. Because, again, like we've talked ad nauseum about this, but like the short version of it is like that game became the MMO it was always destined to be, and that was the point where I fell off. So, that's it.
Fair.
Control the AW
DLC.
Did you play this?
No, because you told me it was bad. So
so that came out, and I saw a bunch of reviews that were like, "This is so cool that they tied it into Alan Wake, and it's like the best expansion they've ever done." And I'm like, I played that whole thing. Did I play that whole thing? No, because I got to the fight. Did I finish it? I must have finished it.
I think you said you finished it on the podcast.
Did I? Okay, I must have finished it then.
That says a lot that you can't.
Yeah, totally. It's Alan Wake's barely in it. Well, no, that's a lie.
Yeah.
He's in it, but it has zero impact to the stuff you're actually doing. And it mentions Bright Falls. It talks about who he is, who Alan is as a character, and like ties into the fact that yes, this was an altered world event that happened in Bright Falls and all that kind of stuff. And as somebody who like, I still think Alan Wake is massively underappreciated for what it did, but like,
oh yeah, I think there are aspects of Alan Wake that are underappreciated.
Yeah, totally. But like, it didn't do anything with any of that.
Yeah, and
like the actual gameplay part of it is just like, hey, you know what's really good? Really super punishing boss fights that are just bad. And you're like, and it did some interesting stuff at the start with Light and Shadow, which in a game that looks as good as that does is kind of cool. But like, it just keeps going, and it's the same thing for all the 4 hours or 5 hours of that. It was super disappointing considering what could have happened with that in that world. It was bad. Did not like it. Watch Dogs Legions. This is an interesting one, right? Because
Watch Dogs Legion, I really wanted to put on this list because Watch Dogs Legion, it was really exciting, like when they were releasing the trailers and stuff like that, and the premise of the game is super cool, like this authoritarian London that is like tech focused and really interesting idea. And then got to the game, and the game's fucking boring.
Yeah.
And really like lifeless and soulless, and in a game that is about people liberating the city back from their authoritarian things, like their authoritarian dictators, doesn't say fucking anything about the work of people to get like liberate themselves, or like the nature of authoritarianism, or like nothing. It just doesn't say anything. It's just a boring fucking bland open world Ubisoft game that has no heart, and it's just mechanically like it was fucking dull. Like that was the problem. When the game was such a cool idea and such a cool premise, it was soulless and it was boring. Like it was awful. I hated that game.
And I think as well, like the idea of the procedural characters, like there's a world,
that was also such a cool idea.
There's a world in which that is super cool, but once you actually get into the game, so I started that game with permadeath on because I was like, that's a cool idea, right? You procedural characters that you care about them surviving, which is awesome. And then once you get into the game, you start to see the mechanics, and you're like, okay, these procedural characters are collections of traits that will enable you to do specific things. That will enable you different access to different things. But the idea that the permadeath, all that's going to do in that world is meaning I have to go hunting for someone else who has the same traits, because I do not give a fuck about any of these characters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's just like, well, I immediately switched permadeath off once I saw what was underneath it all. You're like, oh, why would anyone play this with permadeath? It offers nothing to this game. Yeah, it's super. I put like 10, 15 hours into that game, and I was just like,
something like that.
It just doesn't change. Like, you liberate an entire section, and you're like, cool, absolutely nothing's different in this area.
Yeah, nothing is different. It is liberated. The people are incensed to rise up against their authoritarian masters. What happens? There's maybe less police. Maybe. Like, that's it. There's nothing different about it. It sucks.
Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad.
So yeah, I put Cyberpunk on here. The game itself is disappointing through the lens of what that game set itself up as, where if you strip yourself of all expectations and all hype and everything surrounding it, that game is pretty good. It is a pretty good open world Cyberpunk game. Some cool stories in it. Mechanics are fun. Like, it's pretty decent. If you look at it from literally any other lens, like the lens of what the developers have been saying, the lens of what people in the public have been saying, it becomes marred in such terrible, terrible situations that it becomes so sad that game is what it is.
Yeah.
That, like, if it lived up to the hype and was like the fucking best video game ever, like, sure, whatever. But the fact that it's just pretty good at the end of the day, like, it's decent, like, it's a good game, but like all the other stuff surrounding it has been so bad.
Yeah, like, this has been the great struggle for me, because Cyberpunk's probably going to be in my top 5, my personal 5, probably.
Sure, I don't blame you for that. Yeah, that's fine.
But like, it's so hard to talk about bits of that game, right? Because for me, that game is the Bethesda game that I've never been able to play, right? It's exactly one of those games, and from the moment that they started showing gameplay of that game, when it looked like an actual video game, not just a bunch of weird screenshots, like, that I got that's what it was, right? Like, I understood that that's what that game is. And you take that game where it looks great, has actual characters that emote, and is set in a world and setting and kind of ethos that I am very attached to. Like, that game is exactly what I thought it was. If not... Yeah, it's basically exactly what I thought that game was. The problem I'm having is that it's very difficult to both criticize and praise that game, because both sides of that have so much baggage at this point that it becomes very difficult to say, no, I understand that, like, that company is horrific, that company's marketing is horrific.
Yeah. So
but it's also a good game, and then also the people who are super coming to bat for that game, a large percentage of them are horrible pieces of shit. You're like, I know where I stand on this game, but the problem is that it's mired in such shit from both sides. You're just like,
this is why I put it on the disappointing list, because the game itself, taken in isolation, I'm not disappointed in.
Yeah.
The game, I'm disappointed in the developers. I'm disappointed in the marketing for it. I'm disappointed in the reaction of the certain parts of the community that seem very vocal.
100%.
I'm like, the bits surrounding it are the things that disappoint me, because if those things didn't exist, the game would be really enjoyable and would be really
totally
like a really cool thing to sit and play. But it's now marred in all this stuff that makes you feel really bad for playing it, especially when you think about like crunch and like all that stuff that was surrounding it, and the complete fucking shit that they've had with the last gen versions of it. Like, there are people that can't play that game because it's not ready yet.
Can I make a trade where we leave this where it is for now, but we go back into this when we talk about biggest news, because this game could be real fucking high on that list when you talk about everything surrounding the game. I just think for this category, I think we're genuinely just talking about the product that, well, I can't even say the product they put out there, because there are so many restrictions.
That was broken at the time.
Right?
Like, that was.
But like, I think we have to talk about the game itself.
We'll say this is a preamble to the discussion that will
happen
later.
So much about this game is fucked, but like,
the
game that they put out is basically the game I assumed it
other than it being kind of broken a lot of the time, but that's
totally.
Last of Us 2. I put Last of Us 2 on here because I was the one that played it. Last of Us 2 was disappointing. It was a purely personal thing, but it was disappointing to me because it was a game that I thought that I really wanted to see the end of, and then got 15 or something hours in it, put it down, and then never picked it back up, because when I thought about playing it, I realized that I didn't want to, for various reasons of like the story that game tells in especially in the current climate, is not the sort of story I want to experience right now. A story of object bleakness and misery about a worldwide pandemic that has ruined society is not something that I currently want to play. And it's also like, it's not just that which kind of prevented me from playing it. The fact that combat in that game is just bad. Like, it's not, I'm sorry to anybody that thinks that game's a masterpiece, but the combat's really bad. Like, it's the humans are the gunplay in that game is just really hard to use at the best of times, but the humans in that game take way too many bullets to kill. And obviously it's supposed to be a situation where, like, oh, don't get into gunfights, but like, the game doesn't give you enough feedback for you to be able to stealth stuff really well. They implement a whole bunch of stuff that just like kills you outright, like there are bombs and mines and stuff like that, like, and if you're like worrying about just trying to be stealthy and you're not paying attention directly to your feet, you just die randomly. And then you get into like the encounters with the infected, which are stealth sections that fucking suck, because it is you sitting in a corner hiding, waiting on animations to cycle out so that you can move behind people and choke them, or it's you get discovered and you have to kill things really quickly, some of which take so much resources to take down that it's ridiculous. Like, the combat's just not fun, and they try and break up the undoubtedly gorgeous, well acted, well animated thing that game is, with sections that just fucking suck. And like, I actively did not want to play it. It's it's just a plus point from that aspect of something that I really wanted to see the story play out, but just could not bring myself to play.
It definitely feels like a game that, again, I haven't played it. I will at some point this year, I'm sure. It feels like it's unclear what they were trying to do with it, right? Like, if you take what happened in the first game, which I don't think this game needed a sequel. Like, I can see why they did it. Like,
I don't either,
one from pure business reasons, but also like, there's an interesting thing about what happens to Ellie after that first game. Like, I can see a use for that, but like, the idea that you'd put a game out that is just like that dire, like, in every sense of the word, like, it's just so bleak, and like, and again, you want to talk about games that had like marketing that horrifically put you off the game. Like, every single trailer for that game made me less interested in playing it, because it's like, I don't need to see somebody's intestines pulled out. That I'm not opposed to like that. Like, I'm not opposed to gore in video games, right? I'm not, and it doesn't affect me in the same way, in like bad ways. But like, that doesn't serve a purpose. Like, the bad guys are bad, great. I don't need to see you like pornographically shoot this thing. And it's just like, it feels a lot like this is the marketing of Cyberpunk in an actual video game that pulled through on it. Like, it's you'll look how edgy we are. It's like, great, you're not HBO. Also, HBO isn't this anymore. Like,
this isn't what they do anymore.
Just stop. Like, I'm slightly worried about Naughty Dog as a studio, that the people that had to make this. It was. I want to try that game, but I want to try that game in a way that I don't have to pay for it, and two, I want to be able to put it down and go, I don't need to finish this. Cool.
Yeah, that's kind of what happened to me.
Okay, tell me about the last 6 hours of Final Fantasy VII and why it's so bad.
Right. Fucking this game.
Can I just check, though, before we start? If I'm at the boss, the helicopter, not the helicopter, but the... You know what I am. The boss that does the, like, bomb drop, like, I'm going to massacre everyone, you have to stand underneath them to...
you've not had it yet.
How many hours have I got left?
I don't even remember. It's been too long.
Okay.
But the last 6 hours is kind of... I'll say... When you get to the Shinra building, that's the point at which I'm talking about.
Okay, cool.
Because that game... So I really like Final Fantasy VII Remake, don't get me wrong. But they spend a lot of time, they are ramping up, and the Shinra building, like, for the people that in the know about Final Fantasy VII, you know that this game ends when you get out of Midgar.
Yep.
Which you know happens directly after the Shinra building. So you know, hey, Shinra building's when it's all going to go down, and then we're done. Like, that's the... So they build up to it, and it's really big and impressive, and they go, we're at the Shinra building, we're going to go and get Aerith and, like, deal with all the problems. And they throw so much random bullshit and roadblocks that don't need to happen in your way to actually finishing the game that it artificially inflates the length of the game for no reason. Like, there is a whole part in that section in the Shinra building where... There are, like, boss fights that don't need to happen. There's a whole mechanic that they introduce of, like, VR battles that are just there purely as, like, a, hey, do you want hard boss fights for different materia? Here you go.
Wait,
like, that sort
the thing
of thing
that they do out in the main... The rest of the... Like, the thing that the kid gives you, the researcher gives you, like, those VR battles.
So it's like that, but done to, like, an nth degree. It's like Chadley turns up in the Shinra building and is like, hey, we've got this massive VR thing now that can do even bigger stuff.
Oh god.
Like, it's that. There's a whole thing about that. There's you fall into the bowels of the Shinra building at some point and have to deal with, like, Hojo and a bunch of his experiments for hours, and it sucks. It's terrible. For, like, no reason. Like, you know the enemy in Final Fantasy VII in the Shinra building that's like the big fish that looks like a radiator that like swings around.
Yep.
Like that's a boss fight that you fight over multiple locations in the basement of the Shinra building for, like, no reason other than Hojo saying, I want to test you and see what you're like. Like,
wow.
That's it. So you do all that, and there's, like, multiple boss fights, and you get to the roof, and then stuff happens on the roof that is, like, kind of interesting, but not really. And then there's a series of boss fights of, like, you fight Genova, and you fight the Shinra's son, and then there's another boss fight as well. There are, like, 3 boss fights that are almost back to back that are whatever, but they're there to, like, inflate the length of the game for, so, like, they're really hard fights as well, but anyway.
Okay.
Do all that stuff. Get out the Shinra building. Cloud gets Fenrir. You're like, okay, cool, let's do the motorbike sequence, the famous motorbike sequence. Yep. You do that. That's all great, because you've done motorcycle stuff before in Remake, and it's like, it's fairly interesting.
Yep.
You do the motorball fight, which is the big fight at the end of the highway thing, but that in Final Fantasy VII Remake, it's like on rails. You do it on the bike.
Gotcha.
Fairly interesting. It's an alright boss fight. You get to the end, and then the moment I'm going to talk about in best moment happens, so I'll save the details of that.
Okay.
But that bit leads to a 3-part boss fight that has multiple sections in it that use different characters at different points, and if you fail any one of them, you go back to the start. And it includes in-game cutscenes that you can't skip.
Oh.
So, and the best point about it is the final part of it is a fight where something turns into Bahamut, and Bahamut has a move that can wipe your party if you're not looking for it. It is awful. It's such a bad idea because you just get wiped by Bahamut and you get put right back to the start and you have to do all of it again. and I wiped like 3 times, and I was infuriated by the end of that fight.
Jesus.
It is. There's a reason I messaged you at the time and said you're going to hate the end of this game.
Right, that's the bit you were talking about? Okay.
That's the bit I'm talking about, is because if you fuck up, you just die and go back to the start and have to do it all again.
Fantastic. You've just certified the fact that I'm not going back to that game, because that fight I'm on was infuriating enough, and I was just like...
It's... The bit that I've put in best moment, the bit at the very end, is really cool, and I'll talk about it, but everything that it's linked to is so... It's so bad, and I really hated the last like 6 hours of that game, like, because it is just, it either does things for no reason to just keep you playing the game longer, or it's a really hard boss fight that makes you suffer through in-game cutscenes for no reason.
Awesome.
It's mental. Real disappointment moment of that game.
Awesome.
But yeah.
Okay, so what are we going to put? I think Animal Crossing has to be one of our top 3.
Agreed. I think Deadly Premonition has to be one of our 3.
And I think Watch Dogs has to be one of our... now...
To be honest, I would have said Watch Dogs as well, but I think you were going to try and say Doom Eternal, and I just can't.
No, if you can't come with me on that, I'm never going to win a one-person fight on that. Also, I don't care enough, to be honest. I was just like, sure. The only thing I'm thinking about Watch Dogs Legion is it bad enough to be... Is it disappointing how bad it is, despite the fact that that game is a Ubisoft open world game? Like, is that enough?
Sure, yeah.
Because
what else do you want to put on it?
I mean, it's kind of down to you, but like, is Last of Us more disappointing?
Yeah, like in a way, because that game has bits of it that I really like and really want to see. It's just actively playing it makes me not want to.
Right.
So yeah, I'd be okay with it. Like,
okay.
It would either be that or the last 6 hours of Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, the problem is we can't put in specific parts of games.
We can't put in specifically a moment, yeah.
But I'm glad you said that, because now I don't need to go back to that game. It's fine. Yeah. Okay, so Animal Crossing, Daily Premonition 2, and Last of Us.
Yep.
Do you have a... Is it Animal Crossing? Or is it Last of Us? Or is it Daily Premonition? Like, I actually don't...
So for me, it's either Animal Crossing or Deadly Premonition for me.
Right.
Like the amount that those two are worse doesn't add up to me not liking The Last of Us.
Sure.
Like, that's just
I think
just there purely as like a check, and it's one of those two.
I think it has to be Animal Crossing, because I think Animal Crossing had... They're as horrifically bad as this year has been. There was not a better year that Animal Crossing could have come out. Right. It is the ideal. Yeah. It could have been. And I the really, most important game of the year.
Yeah, was really looking forward to it, really enjoyed it when I was playing it, but the more I played it and the more I sat and thought about it, I was like, this is not what you want out of an Animal Crossing game.
It really shows what 2020 Nintendo looks like, right? Where, like, it's weird watching Nintendo start to burn some of its goodwill that it's built up over all these years, where, like, a bunch of specific decisions around, like, implementation of... Like, I mean, we've complained about internet, the way that Nintendo treats the internet for years and years and years, but like the idea that like they've built this game around these weird restrictions for stuff that you would expect in terms of like save game management and cloud saves. The multiplayer is basically useless in a game that's traditionally had very good multiplayer. A game that, like, the amount of stories I heard of people who played, like, what was the GameCube game? New Leaf? No.
The GameCube game? No, you mean the DS game? The DS game was New Leaf.
The DS game is New Leaf. The GameCube game. Specifically, the GameCube game is the one I'm thinking of. Where... I can't remember what that one was. But whichever
Animal
one...
Crossing and then... I can't remember.
The stories I heard of people who were super disappointed by Animal Crossing were, like... that the GameCube version of that game became like a family gathering thing, where like you would have multiple islands that live on the same thing. You'd all go visit each other's islands, and you'd all get together to do stuff, and all like in a year where you have never been more stuck with a bunch of people in the same house. This could have been a good way to not only pull together a family, but also talk with your friends that you can't physically see. Like, it had every opportunity to be incredible, and because Nintendo fucked a bunch of very key decisions for reasons that they still have not explained, despite having been pushed multiple times, like...
Oh, yeah, they're not...
It just
they're
doesn't...
really bad at explaining anything.
Yeah, and, like, the idea that... Yeah, and this is, like... For me, this was the point where Nintendo started to fall in the circles that I follow. Like, this is the point where people started to get really... A bunch of decisions this year for Nintendo made it really look worrying. Like this, the 30th anniversary stuff, the cease and desists, the
the really authoritarian nature of
like
Nintendo's
the weirdly like protective
video
like,
recording and stuff like that. Yeah.
Nintendo becoming the Disney that it was always destined to be, almost, of like...
If I could have put the Nintendo's behavior around Super Smash Brothers on this list, I would have done, because they're just being awful about it. But it's that sort of general idea that...
I'm just going to add the word Nintendo to biggest news, and we can talk about it then. But specifically for this game, like, just a bunch of specific decisions just totally ruin the potential of that game. And as the first big Animal Crossing on a home console, I mean, it's massively disappointing, I think.
Yep, I agree.
Cool. So Animal Crossing New Horizons is the most disappointing game of 2020, with Deadly Premonition 2 A Blessing in Disguise and The Last of Us 2 as runners-up. Man, that's... Huh. Yeah.
This has been a weird year for video games, but yeah.
100%.
Yeah.